Jeffrey Espstein, a few years ago, served his first jail sentence, but it was really nothing but a glamour slammer. Well, we're going to tell you about that and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. This is Jeffrey Espstein, The Real Tragedy, Part 2. And we're going to talk about it on today's episode. Charlie Crimebuster, what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show, and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. Glad to have you aboard the Charlie train today. Thank you for becoming a part of our crime family. Hey, if you'd like to reach out with a shout out, we always invite people to reach out to us. You can reach us, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Maybe you have some suggestions about some coming episodes. Maybe you'd like to talk about what we're talking about right now. Maybe you'd like to disagree. It is a safe spot. Reach out with a shout out, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. Hey, if you'd like to support the program, go over there to peacemakernetwork.com. There you'll find how you can not only support us with this program, but you can also support the brave men and women of law enforcement, first responders, and of course, the wonderful military that keeps us safe. Go on over to peacemakernetwork.com. You'll find all about that. If you'd like to get caught up on the shows, well, go on over there to charliecrimebuster.com. We put all these in the show notes. All you got to do is reach over and click. Again, thank you for joining the thousands of people who downloads these episodes of Charlie Crimebuster. All right, now, last week on part 1, I shared with you about the background of Jeffrey Espstein. That was how he and his associates abused underage minors, and how the local district attorney at that time, well, he blew the chances of putting this guy away for good. Now, we also told you how he took that case to the grand jury. Well, he only put one victim on the stand, a little 14-year-old girl, who was treated pretty shabby by the attorneys. Yep, it appeared that the local district attorney, well, appears to me that he tanked his own case. But never fear, because now they took it to the FBI, and in comes the U.S. Attorney in Miami, Alexander Acosta, who, by the way, later became the Labor Secretary under President Trump. Now, Acosta, he appeared to be ready to put this guy away. You see, they had the goods on him. But for some reason, the idea of putting him away in prison, that to rot, well, that got changed into offering Jeffrey Espstein a quote-unquote sweetheart deal. Yes, it literally went from rotting in jail to thriving in jail. In fact, it got so bad that later, well, the DOJ, they did a review on the case. That is from the Office of Professional Responsibility, known as the OPR. And they issued a 350-page report on this so-called sweetheart deal. That report was made public. Now, keep in mind, Acosta, he was a U.S. attorney prosecuting an alleged serial sexual abuser of children. And boy, he had the goods. He had statements from dozens of self-identified victims, all teenage girls, most of them. Keeping in mind, now, these girls did not know each other, but yet, get this, they told just about identical stories, even with collaborating descriptions of the abuser's private parts. And to make matters worse, well, there was also, well, kind of a sexual pyramid scheme to this idea of recruiting other victims. And unfortunately, this means even more minor children get pulled into this unthinkable abuse case. My friend, this was sex trafficking in motion, and it went way beyond West Palm Beach. You see, now they had phone records, flight logs, written messages that corroborates these victims' claims. There was even a search warrant, and it was served. But this creep, well, he must have had friends in high places, because somehow it appears that he was, quote, unquote, tipped off about the search. When they were there, they found that computer hard drives, well, they were missing. Looked like they had been taken quickly into the night in such a rush, well, that the wires were left dangling with no connections. But even then, my friend, this search, well, it turned up naked photos of underage girls, written instructions on delivering flowers to a school, and a full drawer of sex toys. Well, you say, well, anybody could have that. Even adults could have that, consenting adults. Yep, but just anyone isn't preying on underage girls, minors. Now, investigators also uncovered evidence that this jerk was involved in bringing 13-year-old girls from Brazil and Ecuador to the United States to work as prostitutes in sex parties. Now, folks, I have investigated sex crimes as an investigator with the sheriff's office. I've put people in prison for a long time for a whole lot less than this mounting evidence that was available to this U.S. prosecutor. Now, while I hope you would never do anything like this man did, if you did, do you not think that they would throw you behind bars and throw away the keys? Yet, this creep, he's offered a sweetheart deal. I'm going to tell you all about that sweetheart deal in a moment. But now, my friend, it is time for what we call our Crazy Crook Story. You see, we share our Crazy Crook Story to lighten the load of the dark stuff that we cover, like this creepy sex abuser that we're talking about today. Well, here, my friend, is our Crazy Crook Story of the week. Our Crazy Crook Story today, well, it involves two men who were trafficking marijuana. And they were trafficking across the country, and they got high while they were doing it. In fact, they got so high, get this, they called 911 to say the cops, well, that they weren't arresting them fast enough. Yep, you can't make it up. You see, some people can smoke and chill out. Some people get a little paranoid. Others, though, however rare, they get seriously delusional. But boy, these guys, they take the cake. You see, a couple of guys were smuggling 20 pounds of weed from Las Vegas to Bozeman, Montana. And they did wind up in jail like most of these crazy crooks do. But it was after they got so high, get this, that they called 911 to report the cops were following them. This is according to the East Idaho News. And so they politely asked the dispatcher, the emergency dispatcher, to, quote, make these jackwagon cops stop it. Here's what they said. And I got to quote it to you. Here is the quote. Hi, we're two dumbasses that got caught trying to bring some stuff through your border. And all your cops are just driving around us like a bunch of jackwagons. I'd just like for you guys to end it. If you could help me out with that, we would like to just get on with it. Well, my friend, the cops were not following them in, but boy, they definitely showed up after that call. And during that time, a guy by the name of Leland Delonte, well, he explained that he had already tried waving down all the cops in civilian cars, but it wasn't working. Tried to get them to stop. He also noted that the men had plenty of snacks and stuff with them, and that they also had a pretty friendly pit bull. Well, when police did arrive, the two men, they were standing with their hands behind their heads, ready to surrender. Their weed, well, it was hidden inside a garbage bag in a dog carrier, and it had been taken out, placed neatly on the sidewalk for the cops. So, my friend, these idiots who got so high that they called the cops on themselves, well, they are, my friend, indeed, Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now back to our main focus. The first victim that was reported to law enforcement was back in 2005. Now, this person and other victims, they would have to wait 3 years before what they saw, what they were hoping to see, was so-called justice. You see, all that was gathered, the evidence that we mentioned beforehand, but yet, with all that evidence, this subject was given a deal instead of rotting away for years in prison. Now here's the sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Espstein got back in 2008. He would plead guilty to just two state-level prostitution charges. They were just small charges, really. And instead of getting years in prison, well, he would only have to serve 13 months of a mere 18-month sentence. And get this, he would serve it in a private wing of the county jail, where special food would be brought in. And even that time that he was in jail, well, for 6 days a week, he wasn't really in jail. He was on so-called work release, which meant that he could travel with the deputy sheriff and go stay, I say stay and play, at his private office for 12 hours a day. You see, his work release involved him working at one of his own foundations, some scientific foundation, and he could go there for 12 hours a day. And my friend, this slammer glamour times, my friend, was really some terrible times. There was even an internal investigation into this so-called glamour slammer criticism. This was, of course, after they really caught him with the goods and really went to prosecute him 14 years later. And after all this came to the media's attention, well, the sheriff, he launches an internal investigation about this time that Epstein served behind bars down there in West Palm Beach County. You see, the sheriff's office granted Epstein's request to go on a work release for 9 of the 13 months that he spent in jail. Now, he was supposed to be, again, doing work for his science foundation, which was near his attorney's office in an office building in downtown West Palm Beach. And that foundation paid for the deputies to do security while he was there. Now, this was without a court order. And to tell you the truth, the sheriff's office did not require a court order to be able to grant work release. Now, some of the deputies, though, they would be with Epstein during this time, and of course they would make entries into their reports. Here's just some of the things that came from those reports. 2 hours at Mr. Epstein's residence. Quote, drove Mr. Epstein to home at 1200, returned to his office at 2:30. 14:30 hours. You see, those are the words of Palm Beach County deputies guarding Jeffrey Espstein while he was on work release back in 2008 and 2009. You see, the deputies, they did file these brief written reports for each shift of this extra duty assignment. And during the 9-month period, according to these reports, Epstein was able to visit his Palm Beach estate on at least 9 different occasions. One deputy wrote this, quote, nothing unusual, drove Mr. Epstein home at 12 o'clock, returned to his office at 2:30 without incident. Now, at Epstein's part-time home, the deputies either indicated they would stay outside the home or they made no mention of what they did. Each visit, Epstein spent just more than 2 hours before his driver would take him back to his office, followed by the deputies. Now, in only one of these reports did a deputy indicate he contacted his sergeant to get clarity of the duties and responsibilities while at his residence. And the deputy wrote that his superior stated the function is, quote, unquote, to provide security. Now, in regards to the deputy, I've got to say this is true. Work release does not require you to have a deputy with him, but they had deputies there, of course, for security. He was a high-profile releasee, you might say. You are released on your own. However, the deputies were to provide security, and that security was paid for by the client. However, my friend, even criminal defense attorneys will tell you that it's extremely rare for a defendant to go anywhere but their workplace on work release. So why is he ending up going to his home? Now, in Manhattan, an accuser from Palm Beach County, well, they addressed the media at a news conference. And her lead attorney, Brad Edward, he said he had spoken to a new witness who even claimed that Epstein had sex at least once while on work release. He went on to say he was having office visitors, some whom were flown to him from New York, and he continued to engage in similar conduct, literally, while he was in jail. Now, my friend, how would you feel if you were one of the victims of a crime that would bring anybody else to prison? Not a glamour slammer. In fact, this is what one of his victims said about his so-called jail time. She said that wasn't real jail. That was like make-believe jail. That's what Shantae Davis said, who said she was abused by Epstein. And she said to NBC News in a 2019 interview, "It's the jail I would want to go to if I was ever in jail." And my friend, if that was not enough, there's even more to be said about this so-called sweetheart deal. Because in addition to having this glamour-slammer experience, this sweetheart deal also granted him immunity. Immunity from all related federal criminal charges, not only for himself, but any potential co-conspirator who might be involved, like Maxwell. Now, this provision, well, it effectively forbids the FBI from looking into any of the evidence further, for instance, like the lurking charge of international sex trafficking. And by this time, you're thinking like I'm thinking. How could this happen? Well, basically, back in 2008, U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta, well, he derailed an active FBI investigation into the sex trafficking ring. And he allowed this serial abuser, who was guilty of molesting and raping dozens of underage girls, he allowed him, summary is, to serve a 13-month sentence and have 12 hours of that on work release arrangement. Now, in a moment, you're going to hear about what this guy says about the way he handled the case and why he handled it that way. But let's take a moment and let's go away from how he abused minors and talk about how some would like to abuse you right now, and that is through scams. So here is time for what we call our Scam Alert. Here's James Buckland with the Scam Alert of the week.
Thank you, Charlie Crimebuster. This week, our information comes from the Federal Trade Commission Consumer Advice webpage, and it reads like this. Many impersonation schemes start with a call about a routine problem, like suspicious activity on your Amazon account. But in a new twist, the story quickly takes on a more serious turn when you're told someone is using your information to commit crimes and all your money is at risk. The caller convinces you that the court will seize the money in your bank account or retirement savings. The person you're talking to, who claims to be a helpful agent from the FTC or another agency or organization, is really a scammer. The only way to protect your money or clear your good name, the scammer says, is to quickly transfer it to a more secure account. Or they may tell you to cash out your savings and put it into a box or buy cryptocurrency or gold bars. The truth is, instead of protecting your money, you're about to lose all of your savings. The scammer controls the new bank or cryptocurrency accounts, or sends someone to pick up the gold bars or boxes of cash for, quote, safekeeping, end quote. So how can you tell it's a scam? If the caller says you need to buy gift cards, go to cryptocurrency ATM, or go to the bank in person while they stay on the phone with you, that's a scammer. And if the caller tells you to lie to anyone who asks why you're transferring or withdrawing so much money, that's also a clear sign of a scam. So here's what else you need to know and what to do if this is a scam. First of all, the FTC will never tell you to move your money to protect it. Anyone who does is a scammer and is impersonating the FTC. Secondly, ignore all unexpected requests for money. Never transfer or send money, cryptocurrency, or gold to someone you don't know in response to an unexpected call or message. And third, verify the story. If you think there's a real problem with one of your accounts, use a phone number, website, or app you know is real to contact the company. Don't use the contact information in the message you got. If you'd like more information about consumer protection, you can reach out to the Federal Trade Commission Consumer Advice page at consumer.ftc.gov. That's consumer.ftc.gov.
Thank you, James. Now back to our main focus. You see, Acosta, he would later attribute the leniency of this agreement, well, he said, in part, from harassment. That's right, harassment. Harassment from Epstein's high-powered legal team. Now, according to the Herald, his team would hire private investigators to dig up dirt on the billionaire's victims, even on the police officers investigating the crimes, and even on federal prosecutors. So now, let me see now. According to what he said, forget about the victims and what they had to endure. You see, the heat got turned on the investigators. And Acosta, well, he caves. And as one of the investigators said, who was furious with results, he said, as far as investigating me and bringing on private investigators, bring it on. They can watch me 24/7. I'm not afraid. And if you're not doing anything wrong, why worry? But the so-called federal prosecutor, Acosta, he wanted to turn down that heat. That's what he said. And it is understandable that he might want to turn down some of the heat on the victims. But we all know that when we do something questionable, well, most often we want to justify it. And Acosta, he has his way of justifying the reason he accepted this sweetheart deal from Epstein's attorneys. He also said he wanted to spare the young women the embarrassment of testifying and being investigated. Now, I can understand that, folks, because I, too, have been an investigator of sex abuse. And sometimes an investigator in these sort of crimes, they would go along with a deal to keep the victims from having to relive their nightmare on the stand. But my friend, here's the difference. The deals that I would take and most every other investigator takes, it includes some real prison time and real punishment for what the perpetrator did. It's never a sweetheart deal like this creep got. However, most of them would have loved to face their abuser in court. That's right. They would like to look him in the eye, and it would have been good for them to do so. In fact, many of them never got that opportunity even at the end. And at least you ought to give these victims a chance to give their own input. But interesting enough, the families and the victims, they were not contacted and alerted to this sweetheart plea deal ahead of time. And Acosta's answer to that? Well, he says they were negotiating financial payout for the victims. Yep, looks like that's what this is all about, right? A rich man trying to buy his way out of justice. And there are even other reasons for this crazy sweetheart deal that's been reported. In fact, the Miami Herald, they talked about an alternative explanation for the prosecutor's behavior. The Herald learned that as part of the plea deal, well, Epstein, he provided what the government called valuable consideration for unspecified information that he supplied to federal investigators. Now, these documents, they didn't really detail what that information was. But keep in mind that his sex crime case happened just as the country's subprime mortgage market collapse brought us into a 2008 global financial crisis. And records show that Epstein was a key federal witness in the criminal prosecutions of two prominent executives back with Bear Stearns, that global investment brokerage that failed in 2008. And these two were accused of corporate security fraud. Now, Epstein, he was one of the largest investigators in that, or investors, I should say, in that hedge fund that was managed by those executives who were later acquitted. And it's not really known what role, if any, that this case played in Epstein's plea negotiations. But I would tell you that, generally speaking, prosecutors do not take corporate security fraud more seriously than serial child molestation and sex trafficking. If that was the case, then sadly, money, again, becomes more important than the lives of these victims in this sweetheart deal. Now, Epstein, he also attempted to spread the blame, played the blame game on the state's earlier case that dropped the ball, and even the grand jury that failed to indict Epstein earlier. But my friend, there's a word for that. It's called baloney. Still doesn't excuse why Acosta accepted this sweetheart deal. Now, about that earlier mentioned report that the Justice Department did, that was taken, what did it say about this so-called sweetheart deal? What do others say? You see, we heard about what Acosta said, but what do other people say? We're going to tell you what other people say about that in a moment. But first now, let's hear how we can talk about the real brave men and women that protect us every day.
You, our listeners, are an important part of our mission here at Charlie Crimebuster. Now, how is that, you ask? Well, we all appreciate, respect, and honor those whose mission is to save lives, secure our freedoms, and keep us safe, right? See, you are in a unique position to show them just how much you appreciate all they do for us. You can support our men and women first responders, military, and law enforcement officers by becoming a monthly supporter. If you're already a supporter, we want to thank you. If you are one of our heroes, that is, a first responder, military, or law enforcement, we want to sincerely thank you for your service. If you are not yet a supporter, but would like to thank them yourself, become a badge member. Simply go to peacemakernetwork.com and sign up as a badge member for as little as $3 per month, which is basically 10 cents per day. Go to peacemakernetwork.com. That's peacemakernetwork.com. And now back to our crime story.
So now let's talk about this report that came out, which was an executive summary of the investigation of the way that Acosta handled this. The report, well, it really chastised Acosta's judgment, said that they acknowledged that Epstein's victims were treated poorly, but it did go on to say that Acosta did not do anything illegal. In other words, he did not receive funds or any payoff for the way he handled the case. Now, investigators also looked at concerns that Epstein's work release should have required a court order. They concluded that he was eligible as long as he met the qualifications of the Palm County Sheriff's Office. Now, the report also states that the FDLE found no evidence that former Palm Beach State Attorney Barry Krishner colluded with Epstein's defense counsel in order to provide Epstein's any benefit related to that work release or jail placement. Now, it is good to know that there appears not to be a payout for this treatment that he got as a glamour slammer, but that does not negate the fact that the justice system failed these victims with this sweetheart deal. My friend, they caved in to high-priced lawyers who out-negotiated them and got the deal of the life for their client. In fact, one of the attorneys representing the victims, he even had harsher things to say. He said Alex Acosta's actions caused emotional trauma for countless minors who deserved to be protected by the United States Attorney's Office and allowed a serial molester to escape accountability. He and his office failed to give notice to the victims, misled victims, misinterpreted the law, and did not treat the survivors with decency and respect. He went on to say, the mountain of mistakes, he said it wasn't just poor judgment, it was reckless. And another attorney speaking for the victims, he said the report is a cover-up. Even Senator from Nebraska said, letting a well-connected billionaire get away with child rape, international sex trafficking, isn't poor judgment, it's disgusting failure. He went on to say Americans should be enraged. Jeffrey Espstein, my friend, should be rotting behind bars today, but the Justice Department failed Epstein's victims at every turn. You see, this DOJ's crooked deal, well, it effectively shut down investigations to his child sex trafficking ring, even protected his co-conspirators in other states. Justice has not been served. Now, that was back in 2008. Now, let's go to 2019. The tables turned. These victims have now waited 14 years with no real justice. So what happens 14 years later? And did they get justice? Well, my friend, that's part 3. Part 3, where we look into the final days of Jeffrey Espstein. And we even talk about some of the conspiracy theories on how Epstein really died. Did he commit suicide? Or was something else going on? We're going to talk about that and more on part 3, Jeffrey Espstein, the real tragedy. Till this time next time, Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert, for the life you save may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. If you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.